This video, we're going to explain how to respond to an IRS penalty notice. Now, there's a lot of different types of penalties IRS can assess, but let's talk about the failure to file. Typically, it's a pretty firm deadline and when you have to file a return. If you don't file an extension and your return is late, or you do file the extension and your return is late, you'll get a notice from the IRS that you have a late return. If you have a good excuse and you have to substantiate with documents and evidence reasonable cause. So some examples of things that don't work, where people have said that their CPA promised to file it on time and they missed a deadline. Simply indicating to the IRS that you had a CPA that missed a deadline is not enough, because you don't really, what the IRS really looks at, you really need a qualified tax professional to tell you when to file the return. You don't. Now, if it's something more of a technical nature and you file the return with an error on it, and it's really more of a legal question or a super technical tax question, if you get a penalty for that, for misreporting something, you might be able to argue reasonable cause because you relied upon a tax professional. You probably want to get a letter from your CPA, tax attorney, whoever gave you that advice, and IRS will then consider that and potentially abate the penalty. So removing the penalty, the terminology is abating the penalty. That's what you want to ask for. Missing a filing deadline is really difficult. We had a client who we were able to get that for, but you really have to show that even though you took all reasonable measures and acted like a reasonably prudent person, you still couldn't meet the deadline. So there's been cases of people that have been obviously incarcerated in jail, all sorts of different excuses. That in itself was not qualified. People that were out of the country, because you can always file a tax return with the U.S. Embassy in that country. So, carefully consider what the facts are. And if you're going to respond to, which I would definitely always recommend responding to the notice, even if you don't have a good reason, but always be truthful, gather your evidence, provide some documents. Usually third-party records are better if somebody can substantiate, the fact that you need to establish. Get maybe a declaration or a note from that person that substantiates that fact. So the other thing is to make sure you respond within the correct time frame. In the notice, it'll indicate how much time you have to respond. It's typically 30 days, but it could be as short as 15 days or even earlier. Different penalty notices have different deadlines. So make sure you don't miss that deadline. If you got the mail late, the letter, the notice late, or you just are unable to gather the evidence in time, but you really do want to respond, you can write a letter to the IRS requesting an extension to respond to the penalty notice. Now, this is not guaranteed. IRS can still deny your request and assess the penalty. But if you're at least in a bind and you want to get more time, it won't hurt you to request the time. The IRS can deny it, but typically they will grant you an extension. Obviously, post-COVID, IRS is so far behind on mail that they might actually generate a notice indicating that you didn't respond to the penalty letter and assess it to you, even though you did send a letter before the deadline. So be cognizant of that. See if you can find a fax number. Faxing to the IRS is the quickest way for them to get the notice, and keep your fax confirmation. If you're gonna mail, and I would recommend both faxing your request as well, whether you respond to the penalty notice or you ask for additional time, send a certified U.S. mail with return receipt, as well as faxing it. And if you don't have a fax number on the notice, you can contact IRS directly and ask them if there's a fax number for that department that generated the notice. I'm John Milikowsky, founder of Milikowsky Tax Law. I hope this information was useful.